Joined by Jarrid Denney of ScoopDuck and ScoopDuck and Hi-Fi, their podcast over there on the Oregon on 3 site, our podcast on the Georgia on 3 site, crossing over for Saturday's big game between the Dogs and Ducks. It's a top 15 matchup, nearly a top 10 matchup, with Dan Lanning's group coming in at number 11 in the AP poll, number 12 according to the coaches. Georgia, number 3 in the country, behind Alabama and Ohio State in both of those. And Jerry, let's jump right in. I mean, this is certainly an exciting game. And to me, I think it starts, if you want to talk Georgia, Oregon right now, the conversation starts with Dan Lanning, a former Georgia defensive coordinator, making the trip over to Eugene after, leading Georgia's defense to historical heights this past season, helping the Bulldogs end a 41-year title drought. Just your general thoughts on Dan Lanning and his transition to Eugene.
Yeah, for those who weren't following it super closely out west, like the transition from the Mario Cristobal to the Dan Lanning sort of areas of Oregon were really, really tumultuous, and it turned into this month-long search last December where Oregon thought they might end up with Justin Wilcox from Cal, and there were a few other candidates that weren't exactly wowing the fan base. And then all at once, out of nowhere, reports out of Georgia that it's going to be Dan Lanning, and it was kind of a shock at first for Oregon fans who hadn't necessarily, everybody's aware of who he is and followed Georgia last year, but it wasn't the biggest name on the market last year, right? And I think it took a little bit of getting used to for Oregon fans to be like, okay, here's this coach who's not 40 years old yet, who's never been a head coach. What does this mean for our program? And then he starts putting together this all-star kind of staff of assistants and brings in Tosh Lupoy as his defensive coordinator, brings in Kenny Dillingham as his offensive coordinator, and it starts taking shape. And I think momentum has slowly kind of been rolling since January, December sort of time to now, when there's a lot of optimism around the program. I would say probably more than there was last year under Mario Cristobal, right before Oregon went into Ohio State and beat the Buckeyes in Columbus. It's just a totally different feel around the program right now than it was a year ago. And that's of course going to be the case when you have an entirely new coaching staff, but there's just such a sense of, refinement under Lanning, and everything that he and this coaching staff do. It's so, you guys know, covering Georgia every day, everything, there's so much attention to detail. Everything is just very detail oriented. And it's something that I don't want to bash Mario Cristobal, because that staff was very good in its own right and did other things extremely well. But I just feel like the on-field play, and especially its defense, it's going to be a whole different ball game this year.
Yeah, you talk about a different kind of narrative around the program. To me, it feels that same way in Athens, more so from a national perspective, with Georgia getting over that title drought. And Georgia having taken from Oregon a little bit too. Brian McClendon coming back to Athens, his alma mater, to coach the wide receivers group here. There's been a little bit of discussion about that, but I feel like that gets overlooked this week, obviously because the head man in wearing green and yellow is going to be, have those ties to Kirby Smart. Fourth time that Kirby Smart has played a former assistant, twice against Sam Pittman, the first being in 2020, obviously last year as well, and then Shane Beamer at South Carolina, who they briefly cross paths here in Athens. I don't know if I would consider Beamer from the Smart coaching tree as much as I would consider him from A, his dad's, and B, the Lincoln Riley tree. But you obviously look at Sam Pittman that way, and you certainly look at Dan Lanning that way, based off the opportunities that he got here in Athens. As we shift to the actual game and the players that are going to be on the field, because in listening to both those coaches, we spoke with Kirby Smart on Monday, spoke with him again today on Tuesday as we're recording this, and then y'all heard from Lanning, believe it was last night, you said. In hearing from both those coaches, you get the sense that they don't want this game to be about them. Kirby Smart and Dan Lanning are not going to be out there running plays. This is not, nothing is personal in this battle. It's about the players. And from a Georgia perspective, we've heard this before. We've heard Kirby talk about this from the flip side of things, not from the the former boss, but the former protege. Being under the Nick Saban and having faced off against his Crimson Tide several times, we've heard this. We've heard Kirby say, it's not about me and Nick. It's about the players that we've fielded. And you're hearing that in this same matchup here. It's not about Kirby. It's not about Dan. It's about the players that are going to be on the field. And to me, one of those that dominates the discussion, at least here in Athens, about Oregon is Bo Nix.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's sort of a funny time in Eugene because Oregon still hasn't named its starting quarterback, and they're not going to until about 90 minutes before kickoff on Saturday. And it's obvious at this point that it's going to be Bo Nix. It's been the talk of camp, and there's a very good quarterback competing with him in Ty Thompson. He was a former top 100 recruit that when he committed to Oregon, Duck fans were sort of through the roof happy. He's the best quarterback, at least ranking-wise, who's ever committed to Oregon. And I think everybody sort of was of the mindset that this is our heir apparent, and he's going to be Oregon's next sort of great quarterback in the Marcus Mariota, sort of lineage. And Thompson hasn't necessarily, he hasn't played his way out of a job. He has been in a little bit of an unfortunate situation that under Mario Cristobal, Anthony Brown Jr. was Oregon's kind of fifth-year senior, transferred in from Boston College and won the starting job when Ty was a true freshman. And Anthony Brown kind of drew mixed reviews from Duck fans last year, a lot of times for no fault of his own. He was in an offense that really limited what he could do, and it left Duck fans kind of wanting a lot more out of the quarterback. And now you bring in Kenny Dillingham, who runs a really up-tempo, really exciting offense that I think is going to enable the quarterbacks to throw the ball downfield. And there was a lot of excitement and a lot of hype for Ty Thompson. And then all at once, boom, you have Bo Nix coming in here, who, for folks who don't remember, played his best season, his true freshman season, under Kenny Dillingham at Auburn. And I think that's what's got everybody in Eugene sort of excited right now, is that Dillingham-Nix reunion. And you have a player, I mean, Bo, he struggled with injuries a lot last year. He's been kind of dinged up throughout his whole career. And I know among SEC folks, he's not seen as, I guess, the most consistent quarterback, but he's a player who I think, to be frank, is going to have a lot of success in the Pac-12. He's not playing SEC defenses every week. He's not dealing with a lot of the challenges that he had at Auburn. He's playing with a group of really good skill position players and behind an offensive line that's going to be one of the best in the country this year. So it's going to be a whole different ball game, I think, obviously against Georgia, but at this point, I personally think that Oregon's in really good hands at quarterback. They don't need somebody to go win them the game. They need somebody to manage the game in this offense, and I think Bo can do that and then some for you.
Yeah, I've always talked about, and some folks will give me a hard time about this, but I've always said, dating back to Bo Nix's freshman year, like you said, working with Kenny Dillingham there at Auburn, that Nix kind of scares the crap out of me if I'm a defensive coordinator. He's somebody that keeps me up at night, not because of what he consistently does. Like you said, he struggled with some consistency issues, but what he's capable of doing. I think back to last season when Georgia played him at Auburn. The week before, he made a highlight reel play against LSU, was scrambling around, avoiding Tiger defenders there before throwing a touchdown pass into the corner of the end zone. Just that ability to extend plays has always been something that has, stood out to me about Bo and what he's capable of as a quarterback. And like you said, maybe not going up against some of those SEC defenses will be a good thing for him. Unfortunately for him, he's got to face an SEC defense in week one. And to me, when you're talking about that Georgia defense, this is a matchup that is really interesting to watch. I have said all offseason that Georgia has a good defense, an incredibly talented defense, but they are an incredibly young defense. They are inexperienced, and it would not surprise me one bit if they struggle a little bit early on in the season. An Oregon matchup against a Bo Nix and the weapons that are around him. Like you said, that really talented offensive line that a very veteran group there. You look ahead to week 3, and I know we're not talking about this. I'll talk with our folks over at Gamecock Central about this. But Spencer Rattler, another transfer quarterback that's veteran, that's talented, a guy that is, maybe not the most consistent, but very capable. And so to me, as I look at this matchup, Nix and that Oregon offense against an inexperienced Georgia defense, it would not surprise me if Oregon comes out, like you said, Dillingham and that fast offense, and puts up some points. Is that kind of, would that shock you, Jarrid?
Yeah, and I'm curious for you, because that is sort of the talking point among a lot of Oregon folks, or fans, I should say, is they look at the talent that Georgia lost, kind of the draft last year, and I mean, we all know the names, but do you see that as big of a concern as I guess a lot of Duck fans do? Do you think that inexperience is going to be a major issue on Saturday?
So, in speaking to Kirby Smart this week, he said, that it was asked about some of those young defenders, and was, he said, hey, we need to go play. We need to, because we are, incredibly talented. We feel like we've recruited well enough over the last couple of cycles. You look at what they have done there. They've just stacked talent on top of talent on top of talent. And these guys that went off to the draft this past year, the seniors were in that 2018 class, his first number 1 overall class there. His second full class at Georgia. They were kind of the start of that run of, they were towards the beginning of the run of very talented players. It was the first time that you felt like you had all that talent in every single class, in every single player that was on the team. So, as you lose those guys, you've still got talented players behind them. But to me, like Kirby said, we need to go play. We being Georgia needs to go play because they need experience. And you can only get that so much in practice. They're just simply not going to face much adversity in practice. Obviously, they are going up against an incredibly good offense. And based on what we heard, scrimmage 1 wasn't so great for the defense. Scrimmage 2, they responded to some of that adversity better. But it's certainly going to be interesting to see how they respond to, getting punched in the mouth a little bit if it happens early in this Oregon game. The young guys that haven't been asked to play big roles. Obviously you've got Jalen Carter, Nolan Smith, Keely Ringo, Christopher Smith, Robert Beal, those guys were major contributors on Georgia's defense last year. But around those guys, you're looking at guys that are stepping into bigger roles. Zion Logue on the defensive line. Jamon, that inside linebacker room, it's everybody is stepping into a bigger role because you saw Nakobe Dean, Quay Walker, Channing Tindall, all 3 go in the first 3 rounds of the NFL draft. As those guys exit, you've got Jamon Dumas-Johnson, better known as Pop, around these parts. He's stepping into a role. Kirby and the players have been very complimentary of him as he steps into a leadership position. But you want to see how he's going to perform in the bright lights. The other guys around him, Tresman Marshall and Ryan Davis, are guys that are veterans but have struggled to stay healthy, so they haven't been able to get a ton of experience. A Smile Munden is an incredibly athletic player, on that defensive side of the football for Georgia, but again, just his second season, not able to get a ton of experience. Xavier Sori played in just 4 games last year, redshirt freshman. Again, incredibly talented, but not a ton of experience. So to me, in that front 7, you really see it. I think in the secondary, they don't have a ton of depth because they've had guys go off to the NFL. They've been hit hard by the transfer portal, but you do have a little bit more experience there. With a Keely Ringo on the outside at corner, you feel really good in him as your cornerback 1. You feel really good with Christopher Smith, who's a super senior, back there at safety. beside him. You don't know who the starter is going to be. You get the feeling that it's going to be Dan Jackson, who wasn't a starter for them last year, but did start some games. They feel confident with him at safety. A William Poole at star that played some big minutes for them down the stretch. But it's those young guys that are going to rotate. All these guys that are starting that were rotating last year, they're stepping up. But the guys that are going to be rotating and on the field after these guys, and when they need a blow, when you want to get fresh legs on the field, some of those guys may be completely new faces.
So if there was an area of concern on the defense for you, would it be that front seven at this point?
I think with that's a great question, Jarrid, because I look at that front seven, and I think Jalen Carter can make up for a lot of issues that you have in with any concerns that you would have in the front seven. Again, a Nolan Smith, a Robert Beal, those two guys at outside linebacker, incredibly talented. I feel confident in the guys that are stepping into those spots, but the depth concerns there. That's something that as you get beyond that 1-2 deep, Georgia rotates a lot of guys in its front seven. The big guys, you want to keep them fresh, and so as you start getting further and further down the line, you're looking at guys that maybe are not used to being in this big of a spot. So I guess I would say that's my big concern for Georgia defensively. I still feel pretty strong about it. And I also look at the secondary a little bit because, I think that their mistakes can be a lot more noticeable. A blown coverage costs you 6 points. A missed assignment in the front seven, it may cost you a first down, but you may be able to make up for it with a guy coming downhill to make a tackle. So, maybe Georgia has I would say Georgia has more questions in the front seven, but maybe more concerns in the secondary with some of those guys that are stepping into bigger roles.
Yeah, what about on the offensive side of things? You guys obviously lose a ton of talent at the skill positions, but who are some players that I guess Oregon fans should be kind of keeping an eye on, or maybe be a little scared of on Saturday?
Yeah, before we transition over to the offensive side of things, I do want to ask you real quick about the Oregon offense. Some of those weapons we talked about. Bo Nix. Before we completely flip the field per se, and talk about Georgia being on the offense and Oregon being on defense. Some of those weapons that are around Bo Nix. Give us a little bit of a preview, Georgia fans that are tuning in from the DawgsHQ side of things. Who are some of these guys that we should be looking out for on Saturday? A couple names there that could make big plays for Bo and the Ducks.
Yeah, Oregon's in a funny position at running back and wide receiver sort of because it lost basically all of its starters at both spots last year. Travis Dye transferred into USC. CJ Verdell, who began last year as the starter and then had a really kind of gruesome leg injury that ended his season. They're both gone now. They're Oregon's 5th and 6th most productive kind of ball carriers in program history, yardage-wise. Like, they both had great Oregon careers, and now all at once you have to replace both of them. And Oregon, sort of weirdly enough, is in a better position now at running back than I think they were last year with Dye and Verdell. They have Byron Cardwell, who's a really, really was a highly touted recruit who had a good freshman season, a good true freshman season as Dye's backup after Verdell went down. And there was sort of a thought that he was going to be the starter all through spring ball and kind of the months leading up to fall camp. And Marquis Irving, who transferred him from Minnesota in May, has sort of put that into question. He had an incredible fall camp. He's not a humongous bag, but he's so physical, and that's sort of the name to his game. Like, every carry is just physicality, and he is making a really good push for the starting job. And then behind those two, you have Noah Whittington, transferred in from Western Kentucky, who had a really good spring and a really good fall. You have Sean Dollars, who has been at Oregon, it seems like forever now, and has dealt with a lot of injuries and never had a chance to kind of make his impact on the program. But he's healthy now too, and they're sort of at the very least 4 deep at running back, and you'd have a hard time guessing at this point which of those 4 is going to be the lead ball carrier. My feeling is it's going to be Cardwell and Irving, but you're going to see all those guys probably get carries at some point on Saturday. And then at receiver, again, Oregon lost kind of its two most productive receivers from last year, and Johnny Johnson III and Jalen Redd. They had Micah Pittman, who was really productive early in his Oregon career, and then he left the program midway through last year and is at Florida State now. And they're trying to figure out how to replace all those guys, and it's not necessarily an easy thing to do, but they, just like running back, are really, really deep at receiver. They got Chase Cota transferred in from UCLA, had a really good career there, and he brings a little bit of veteran leadership to a room that probably needed it. And then he's going to be in the mix for snaps with Troy Franklin, who's a former four-star recruit, Dante Thornton, Seven McGee, the same deal. They're all really exciting, kind of really electric players who, you put the ball in their hands, good things are going to happen. And the only issue is they just haven't gotten the chance yet. They're all true sophomores who are sort of suddenly making up the nucleus of Oregon's receiver room. So that's one of the things that I'm going to be most curious about on Saturday, is to see which of, if any of those guys, step up and becomes, I guess, quote unquote, the guy for Oregon.
Yeah, and I think that as you look at that Oregon offense, one thing that both these teams have in common is a great offensive line. Certainly can make up for a lot of deficits that you might have, deficiencies that you might have at other positions. Former offensive lineman here speaking, high school level, but nothing too special. As we transition over to Georgia's offensive side of the ball, you got me going there to start. I think that Stetson Bennett is obviously the starting point. And we could do a whole podcast on Stetson Bennett. Have the feeling that there's going to be a Disney movie made about him one day, because it just feels like, that there is a lot that you can say about this kid. The Spark Notes version of it, for Oregon fans that may not know it all, he came to Georgia as a walk-on, left the program after the 2017 season, when Justin Fields decided to come in 2018. Didn't want to play the backup role, wanted to, as I've said elsewhere, he didn't want to be a fraternity boy on a football team. He wanted to go play football. And so he transferred to junior college, played a season there in Mississippi in 2018, ultimately came back to Georgia in 2019 after, coincidentally, Justin Fields leaves for Ohio State. Bennett is the backup in 2019 to Jake Fromm. Ultimately gets a shot in 2020. Not from the get-go. Georgia was looking elsewhere there as the season was starting, but comes in, saves the day in 2020. Leads Georgia throughout that season. Loses his job due to injury. JT Daniels comes in, impresses down the stretch. As the offense looks a lot better in those final 4 games than they did in the first 6. Daniels takes over the job headed into 2021. He battles injury now, this time in 2021. Stetson takes over, and the rest was history, quite literally, with him leading Georgia to its first national championship in 41 years. I think that as you talk about him in 2022, it's a little bit of a different story. Folks sometimes think that we're still talking about a 2017 version of Stetson Bennett, that he's not a huge playmaker. The kid can run. The kid can make plays with his arm. He can throw the ball deep. He can avoid defenders. He can give defenses trouble. Going to be very interested to see how Dan Lanning, having gone against him for so long at Georgia, both when he was, running scout team and when he was running, the twos, and ultimately last year going one-on-one, how is Dan Lanning going to take what he knows from his Georgia days, and apply it to his new Oregon defense, trying to defend Stetson Bennett. But he's not the only one. There's weapons around him on this offense. Running back Kenny Mcintosh has had one of the best. He's a senior now, has had one of the best camps of his career, according to Kirby Smart. Kendall Milton is a West Coast guy from out in California that's going to be a factor in this running back room this year. He's been a little bit banged up, battling hamstring issues here throughout camp. Georgia is hoping that they can have him back. Last time we were out on the practice field, he did not look too limited, so I would not be too concerned about his status for Saturday. The wide receivers, you've got guys like A.D. Mitchell, who made the go-ahead touchdown catch in the national championship game. Ladd McConkey, who was a redshirt freshman last year. Mitchell being a true freshman, McConkey being a redshirt freshman, was one of the team's leading receivers. Obviously, you're looking at that room, and you want to see guys step up. As George Pickens goes and now shines in NFL preseason and is going to be a stud for the Steelers. Jermaine Burton is now across the SEC with Alabama. You're looking around, looking for guys to step up. They feel very confident in what they have with A.D. Mitchell, Ladd McConkey, and Kyrus Jackson, who is, back for his senior season. Somebody that's been a major contributor, led the team in receiving in 2020, but was banged up in 2021. Still played in all 15 games, but wasn't quite the same version. They're hoping that he can be, get back to his pre-injury self. But outside of those three, they're looking for guys to step up. They need some guys to emerge. And if they can't find it in the wide receivers, well, they have a plethora of the tight ends.
Yeah, and I'm curious with Bennett. Is there anything that has kind of come out of fall camp that he has drastically or markedly improved on that you'll be curious to see on Saturday?
Yeah, I think it's just the comfort level. This is his first time going through spring practice, fall camp as the number one guy. In fact, he's really never even been the backup in that role. More so getting, twos and some twos and more threes reps than he has been ones. And so, I think that overall, as we talk to Stetson throughout camp, as we talk to offensive coordinator Todd Monken, as you talk to Kirby Smart, there is a sense of comfort in what Stetson brings to the table. And I think from Stetson, there's a sense of comfort and confidence that the coaches have in him. They feel like that they are all on the same page. He feels like he's on the same page with the wide receivers. As he so visually described to us, this week in speaking to Stetson, he said, there's just certain things that you don't get watching film, sitting back. You've really got to go through, get the reps with these guys to know that, hey, when A.D. Mitchell turns his shoulder, that's when you throw. When Ladd McConkey, turns his hip, that's when you throw. Because, you can dig into the tape, you can dig into, the playbook as much as you want. You can know that as well as you do. But, as there's nothing that is capable of replicating that quite like, reps and reps and reps. And so, I think that Georgia has given those to Stetson this year. There hasn't been a quarterback competition. Kirby made that very clear. So, interested to see, as Oregon has split some of those reps, how does that affect an Oregon quarterback? Well, on the flip side of things, I'm very interested to see how it affects Stetson Bennett not having split those reps. Getting that extra time with these guys, knowing that he's the starter. Just again, I feel confident in him as Georgia's quarterback. There's a lot of folks that still, like I said, see him as that 2017 walk-on, the 2020 former walk-on that was, just thrown into the fire and responded well, but at the same time made a lot of mistakes. What was asked earlier, what is it going to take for Oregon to win this game? I think it would take Stetson getting uncomfortable, having to do different things offensively based on what Oregon does defensively, putting pressure on him, because the times that we've seen Stetson play at his worst, it's been more so, when he's been pressured to throw the ball quite as much. Jarrid, as we kind of wrap up this discussion here a little bit with the Oregon defensive side of things, what do you think Oregon can do defensively to put that pressure on Bennett and the Georgia offense?
Yeah, it's going to be so interesting, because last year Oregon had so many incredible defensive pieces. You have Kayvon Thibodeau, the top 5 draft pick, who was a unanimous All-American, and I think personally he was sort of misutilized and underutilized in Oregon's defense last year. It just wasn't a scheme that was particularly well suited to get the best out of him and Brandon Dorless and a few of these other big names who were really good players for Oregon last season, but you wouldn't know it looking at their stats, and you wouldn't know it looking at sort of the team defensive stats that were really middle of the road for the Pac-12. It was a really underwhelming year, and now you bring in Dan Lanning, coming off of one of the greatest defensive seasons in college football history, and a lot of those pieces are still there. Oregon lost Thibodeau, and they lost Jerome McKinley III, who was an All-American safety, but aside from that, they have a ton of talent left, and they did really well in the transfer portal. They added Christian Gonzalez from Colorado, who is a Pac-12 ready player who started there last season and is sort of, I would say he was Oregon's MVP of fall camp. He came here as somebody who probably had a good chance of securing a starting job. Oregon's replacing 2 starting cornerbacks, but he is sort of playing his way into first, second, third round NFL draft pick conversation. He popped up on Bruce Feldman's freak list. He might be the fastest player on the team, but he still is sort of a really big physical corner, and I think that's going to be a huge asset for Oregon this year. They got pretty good kind of play out of the starting corners last year, but I think Christian Gonzalez brings something absolutely different to the table, and he's going to be huge for them. And they sort of just have playmakers at every level. We haven't even talked about Noah Sewell and Justin Flo yet.
I was going to say, how could we get this far into a podcast and not talk about the 2 studs at inside linebacker that Georgia fans remember from their recruitment?
Yeah, and it's a funny thing with Justin Flo. He might be one of the most talented players to ever come to Oregon, just from a sheer physical football standpoint, and he's only been able to play 2 games in 2 years because of 2 really unfortunate injuries. And it's kind of become a joke among the Oregon beat writers that every time he gets an availability, he's so intense. Like, there's just intensity like radiating off of him, even when he's in a really sort of laid back, calm press conference setting. The dude just doesn't have an off switch. And if you've had a chance to watch him play, he played 1 game last year against Fresno State in Oregon season opener, and he racked up 14 tackles, and everybody thought he was sort of bound for this really incredible season, and it just unfortunately hasn't turned out that way. But he's fully healthy. Like you said, he's next to Noah Sewell, who, for all the guys I just mentioned, Noah Sewell is probably Oregon's best player. He might be the best defensive player in the Pac-12. He might be the first inside linebacker off the board in next year's draft. He's incredibly talented. He is a tackling machine. He's one of the hardest hitters I've ever watched play football. He rushes the pass really well. The one knock on him last year was sort of he wasn't always great in coverage. His PFF grade would definitely reflect that, but that's something that sort of by all accounts he's shored up in the offseason. And I think having Justin Flo next to him and having just an overall more competent defensive scheme is going to make him a lot better in that aspect. So with the defense, I'm not unearthing anything new here, but I think the secondary is a little bit of the concern for some folks. Like I said, they lost a starting safety, 2 starting cornerbacks. There were a lot of position battles going on there to start fall camp, and they've sort of all been sorted out. And Oregon has a lot of interesting pieces there. It's just players who are unproven and haven't necessarily gotten their shot yet. So that's one of the other things I'm going to be keeping an eye on Saturday, is just how does that secondary perform against some really talented receivers, a really experienced, really quality quarterback, and do they sort of hold their own and then some against Georgia? I think that's going to be one of the storylines.
Yeah, and one of the things that I'm looking for, to really, out of everybody that Georgia plays this year, but that starts with Oregon, how do you think Oregon tries to defend against these tight ends that Georgia has? It's a 3-headed monster there, really 4-headed if you want to go to freshman Oscar Delp, down the depth chart. But you've got Brock Bowers, who was one of the national freshman of the year, SEC freshman of the year, broke all sorts of records for Georgia, leading pass catcher for the team last year, most touchdowns in a single season, receiving touchdowns. Just an absolute freak. You put on top of that a 6'7", 275-pound tight end in Darnell Washington, who just saying those, saying that height and weight screams freak. You look at him out on the football field, it's even scarier. If you're, we've joked about, on the Georgia beat, how much would you have to get paid to get run over by Darnell Washington? Because I'm not sure there's enough money in the world here. Just standing next to the guy is scary. And then you add in on top of that a guy like Eric Gilbert, who was SEC Freshman of the Year before Bowers when he was at LSU, stepped away from football last season, and Georgia fans are certainly excited to see what he's capable of. Had a big spring game. As you look at that matchup, because I think that you look at Georgia, and that's one of the things that people look at first, that tight end group, and you look at Oregon with Dan Lanning there on defense now, and an emphasis being put on that side of the ball. How do you see the Ducks trying to match up with some of those big tight ends?
Yeah, it's interesting. And Lanning was asked sort of about that same thing at his presser last night. And somebody brought up the point that, Florida and Tennessee and one other school that I'm going to forget did a good job at limiting Brock last year. They had one catch and less than 50 yards against Florida, I believe, and something similar against Tennessee. Could you sort of draw from that tape and kind of deploy a similar game plan? And Lanning just kind of quickly pointed out, he's like, yeah, that's great and everything, but they didn't win. So yeah, you stopped Brock from getting his, but you still lost. So it wasn't successful. And obviously Lanning, kind of like Kirby Smart, he's been really coy. He's not going to give anything away. And why would he? But how do you go about defending Brock Bowers, right? We were asking Bennett Williams about that today too. One of Oregon's safeties kind of / stars. And he was asked, like, do you throw bracket coverage at him? Is that something that like you guys could swallow your pride and do? And it's sort of the same thing. You can't just let the whole game plan fall apart just to stop Brock, right? There's playmakers all over the field. So you have to figure out a way to stop him without pooling kind of all your resources towards him. And I think Oregon is, I know I talked about the secondary being a concern, but I think they're sort of uniquely in a good position where they have a couple of good nickel corners in Bennett Williams and Jamal Hill that bring different things to the table. Bennett's more of a traditional corner. He could play anywhere in the secondary, honestly. He'll end up playing a lot of safety this year, who can sort of stick with a lot of really good players in coverage. And then Jamal Hill is kind of more of a thumper and a hard-hitting I guess traditional safety, and you kind of swap those two back and forth if you want to throw nickel at the tight ends. As I mentioned earlier, Noah Sewell, I think Oregon fans are hoping is going to be a lot better in coverage, and he's going to have to be than he was last year. And same with Justin Flo. He sort of slimmed down this year to fill a little bit more traditional linebacker prototype, and I think those guys are athletic enough to at least have a chance against the tight ends. But I think you're going to be asking this question a lot this year. Like, what can anybody do to stop this whole tight end room? Because it didn't happen last year.
Yeah, it's certainly going to be an interesting matchup to watch, not just this Saturday, but all season long. Jarrid, I know we're going to give our predictions over at DawgsHQ later this week. I assume y'all are going to do the same thing over at ScoopDuck?
Yeah, we ran that yesterday, and I'm weirdly on the more positive side of sort of our whole staff. I don't know about you at this point.
Yeah, I guess if y'all have put out your predictions, let's hear what you think. How you think this game will play out.
Yeah, I've got Georgia winning 28-17, and I think the spread's still at 17.5. I think Oregon's going to more than cover that. I think they have enough talent that they're gonna keep it close until the fourth quarter, and ultimately, Georgia's a really good football team that I don't know if anybody's going to beat this year, and doing that in Atlanta is going to be really, really tough. But I just think this Oregon team is going to surprise a lot of folks who think that they're just going to get run off the field. They've got talent everywhere. I wouldn't be surprised if they made a run for the Pac-12 title, despite Utah and USC being kind of really, really talented. I think they're going to have a great year. So. Like you, I'm really, really curious to see how it unfolds.
Yeah, like I said, we're going to give our predictions over at DawgsHQ later this week. Just my initial feeling, seeing that 17 and a half number feels really big, but ultimately to me it comes down to, both these defenses. How can Georgia, how does Georgia's defense look coming out of the gate? Are they in sync? Do they have some troubles? If they do, I think this is probably a little bit closer game than some folks, than Vegas thinks. But if they're in sync and Georgia's offense is able to put up, the points, at will, like a lot of folks think that they will be able to do, that 17 number might get a little closer. I'm with you. I think it'll probably be a pretty close game. And I could see Georgia maybe getting, covering the spread late, as they pull away. But I, especially out of the gate, do think that a lot of energy that goes into these games, with extra time to prepare. I think that there's some tricks up their sleeves that they could have, both sides. Is Lanning going to be willing to pull that out in his first game? We'll have to see. But ultimately, I'm excited to see football this coming Saturday. I'm sure you are too. And I've had a lot of fun doing this crossover.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Likewise. Appreciate it.
Well, that does it for us on the crossover edition of Dog Walk Talk and the ScoopDuck Show. ScoopDuck in Hi-Fi. DawgsHQ for me on the Georgia side of things. Jarrid, Denney, and ScoopDuck. And the On3 network for both of us. Appreciate y'all tuning in, and looking forward to breaking down this game afterwards as we finally get to see some football this Saturday. Thanks, Jarrid.